about those Russian atrocities in Bucha and a human rights lawyer on the case against Putin. Remember when deciding whether it was COVID was all about listening out for a dry, continuous cough? Now the official list of symptoms has grown from 3 to 9. We'll explain what you now need to look out for. Also, Elon Musk has just become the largest single investor in Twitter. He's a free speech enthusiast, but can he reinstate the Twitter account of Donald J. Trump? And the death of the actress who played Dot Cotton in EastEnders sparks debate about just how woke our soap operas have become by turning into sociology lectures. Have they actually become unwatchable? Your views on any and all those stories, email gbviews@gbnews, and we'll try to read out as many as we possibly can. Here's the news.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 4 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky says Russia has committed the most terrible war crimes since World War II. Speaking via video link at the United Nations Security Council in New York, he warned of what he called further Russian cruelty in other Ukrainian towns and villages. He asked the UN to act immediately and make sure that the Russian military could be brought to justice. Also speaking at the UN Security Council, United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres said Russia's invasion of Ukraine is one of the greatest challenges ever to international world order.
I'm also deeply shocked by the personal testimony of rapes and sexual violence that now are emerging. The High Commissioner for Human Rights has spoken of possible war crimes, grave breaches of international humanitarian law, and serious violations of international human rights law. And the Russian offensive has also led to the displacement of more than 10 million people in just 1 month, the fastest forced population movement since the Second World War.
Kiev's mayor Vitaly Klitschko has urged European politicians to cut all commercial ties with Moscow, saying all payments to Russia are bloody money.
Stop commercial communication with Russia, because every euro, every cent, what you receive from Russians or what you send to Russia have blood, is bloody money. In the blood of this money, it's Ukrainian blood.
Ooh, let's move on, so apologies. NATO Secretary-General has said Russia is guilty of war crimes and Vladimir Putin may face justice. Jens Stoltenberg says foreign ministers will discuss sending more weapons to Ukraine when they meet on Wednesday and Thursday. He told a news conference in Brussels that Russia isn't giving up its offensive in Ukraine, but will try to refocus on completely taking the Donbas region in the coming weeks.
This is unbearable brutality that Europe has not witnessed in many decades. Targeting and murdering civilians is a war crime. All the facts must be established, and all those responsible for these atrocities must be brought to justice.
Jens Stoltenberg there. Here in the UK, the government has commissioned a review of the latest scientific evidence on fracking. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has written to the British Geological Survey asking for a report on the latest evidence around the extraction of shale gas. Since 2019, there has been suspension on the process as it is not possible to accurately predict tremors associated with fracking. Mr. Kwarteng says that the government will explore all possible domestic energy sources in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Public school absences for COVID-related reasons have fallen over the past fortnight, but school leaders are still concerned about attendance rates. School and college unions say there's been greater COVID-related disruption over the last few weeks than at any previous point during the pandemic. They're calling on the Education Secretary to reinstate free lateral flow tests for pupils and staff. Government data shows almost 180,000 pupils were off school because of COVID, with nearly 9% of teachers at the end of last month. Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee Chair Julian Knight has questioned the motives for Channel 4's privatisation, posting on Twitter, "Is this being done for revenge for Channel 4's biased coverage of the likes of Brexit and personal attacks on the PM?" Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries says government ownership is holding the broadcaster back from competing against streaming giants like Netflix and Amazon. The channel was founded in 1982 and currently receives its funding from advertising. Climate activists at Just Stop Oil have blocked a main road near Kingsbury Oil Terminal in Warwickshire by climbing on top of an oil tanker. They're ignoring a temporary High Court injunction by preventing tankers from entering and exiting the site. Activists have been blocking access to oil terminals over the past 5 days, demanding that the government stops new oil and gas projects.
Our demand of Just Stop Oil is to stop new oil projects. The government are planning 40 new ones, and we feel it's disgusting in this time of climate crisis and fuel poverty that they're opening these new projects when renewables can come online so much faster.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Brazier.
Six minutes past 4, a lot to get through today. But just when you thought our revulsion at Russian war crimes could grow no deeper, along came Bucha, once an affluent suburb and home to Kiev's middle and upper class residents. Bucha has provided a horrific punctuation mark in the story of Ukraine's ongoing suffering. Yesterday, the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky visited the area in what appeared to be a harrowing moment for him personally. He declared that the world must go further to limit Putin's ability to wage war. As you'll have seen in the last few minutes, he's just been addressing the UN Security Council. We'll reflect on that in a few moments. Well, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, she's been in Warsaw meeting her Ukrainian counterpart. The Foreign Secretary pledging that the UK would do more to help the Ukrainians by providing extra military support, also introducing more financial sanctions in a bid to hobble Putin's war machine. And late last night, the Ukrainian president praised the Prime Minister and singled out Britain for its response to the crisis. Zelensky said Britain had been brave in its support for Ukraine and that the Prime Minister had taken historical action to combat Russia. Meanwhile, the president appealed to some European countries to do more. Well, let's turn to former UN Special Prosecutor and human rights lawyer, Professor David Crane, who's joining us from New York. Professor, thanks for your time. I wonder, well, if you haven't done yet, I'm sure you will, look at the words of President Zelensky addressing into New York, at least from Ukraine, with a message of reform, actually, for the UN, saying the UN needs to get a grip insofar as it possibly can of events in Ukraine, evoking memories of Nuremberg and pointing out that even the worst Nazi war criminals were eventually brought to trial.
You know, we have to use the UN as a legitimate source of jurisdictional power in order to deal with war criminals. So we just can't push the UN aside. I can understand and appreciate and respect, frankly, his frustration. But we do have the capacity, the United Nations, particularly the United Nations General Assembly, does have the capacity to deal with and create an appropriate legal mechanism to deal with the aggression that Vladimir Putin has perpetrated against the people of Ukraine.
Professor, obviously, while Putin's still in place, it's impossible to bring on his head the charges that many are willing to lay. Is it possible, do you think, for the UN to go over Putin's head, if you like, and say to people in Moscow and beyond that this is very much in your own enlightened self-interest to decapitate the leadership, get rid of Putin and everything changes, hand him over and you can look forward to better times?
Well, you know, I'm going to answer your question based on just experience. I'm the prosecutor who took down President Charles Taylor of Liberia. We've done this before, and we can do it again. What we need to do is to continue forward with the International Criminal Court, building a case against Vladimir Putin for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The UN General Assembly, working with the people of Ukraine, the government of Ukraine, create a special court for Ukraine to deal with the aggression. These mechanisms can move forward. They can investigate and indict Vladimir Putin, even though Vladimir Putin is sitting in the Kremlin. And from there, he is now a legitimate war criminal, and eventually there may come a political moment by which Vladimir Putin can be handed over to an appropriate justice mechanism. We did that with Charles Taylor, and we certainly can do with Putin. And I have to applaud President Biden by plainly saying this guy is a war criminal and he needs to be prosecuted as a war criminal. You know, Vladimir Putin is no longer a legitimate head of Russia, and they'll begin to realize that. And we'll see what happens politically within Russia. But on an international stage, Vladimir Putin has no legitimacy as president of the Russian Federation.
It's an odious comparison, but you mentioned previous war crimes. You've been involved in prosecuting cases against war criminals. When you look at pictures, as we've been looking at them, been shocked by pictures from Bucha, how do we compare them? How do we put them in a framework that allows us to get a sense and calibrate just how awful they were?
Well, you know, it's interesting. We have to always remember the victims. This is for and about the victims. And regardless of whether it's in Ukraine or West Africa or Myanmar or Syria, these are victims of atrocities, and they need to be dealt with. What we're seeing in the Ukraine is tragic and horrific, but it's indicative of the war crimes and crimes against humanity that are being perpetrated literally as we speak in other parts of the world and that have taken place in the past. The most important thing about the past is that we dealt with those individuals, the heads of state, the dictators, the thugs, and we prosecuted them. And so we have to do that again in 2022. If we do not do anything about this from a legal point of view, the strong men around the world are watching like crocodiles. And if we don't do anything, then it's going to be a very interesting world indeed.
Professor David Crane, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed for it. Joined here in the studio today by my guest for the next 2 hours, Lynn May, regular contributor here, and also General Chip Chapman, who's been speaking to us, not necessarily from the studio, but offering some interesting analysis, to put it mildly, in recent weeks since the Ukraine crisis began. Where are we? We're 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks in now. Your reflections?
Well, if you look at what Liddell Hart said, one of the key strategists in the 20th century, Russia has done 3 things, which actually are slightly in its favour at the moment. The first is adjust your ends to your means. So the original strategic objectives are gone. The 2 fronts, Central Front in the north, the Western Front, that's Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, that is gone. So they're concentrating in the south. The second one is don't do a line of attack, which has already failed. That's exactly what happened in the centre and the west. So they've got rid of that. The third one is adopt your form and tactics to adopt the flexible arena you see around you. That is what they're doing in the south. So to consolidate and reposition makes sense from their perspective. Grand strategic objectives have changed. They won't achieve those. Their original strategic objectives, knocking over the political polity in Kyiv, that is gone. So now it is the south, which Putin can play for, because of course the original objectives, as he said they were, although they were wider than that, were of course threefold. We are going into the Donbass as a peacekeeping operation to liberate people who have had genocide against them. All that is not true, but that's what he can now sell to his people to consolidate there, move to Mariupol and try and join up with Crimea. That is the strategic sort of end at the moment. Then you come on to the spectrum of what is going on and what we've seen in Bucha. On the left of that, we have moral injury. That is what happens in war when you're in contact. But that is just the red mist. That is not institutionalized in the way 2 other things can happen. The first is democide, death by government. And we've seen that in the way that they do these siege and starve operations. And on the right of ARC, you've got genocide. And genocide doesn't have to be by scale. It is the intent to destroy in whole or part a religious, racial, national or ethnic group. They want to destroy the Ukrainians as a nation, and certainly those leaders, both cultural leaders and political leaders in the areas they're at.
Lynn, Chip comes at this as a military analyst who studied the history and the maps and the tactics. In a sense, we come at more as from a human dimension, don't we? And anybody passing the newspaper stands this morning who would have seen that picture of Vladimir Zelensky looking harrowed and careworn and beaten, as if he was on the verge of tears, will have taken away something.
Yeah, I think obviously I'm not a learned person on this topic as yourself, but I've done a lot of reading, and I think we need to be very careful, especially, from our couches at home, we immediately want to have this opinion on either side. And I refuse to do that. And I faced a lot of criticism because I have seen loads of information from both sides. And as we know historically, there has been wars in the past where we have got it wrong as the West. Now, I'm not saying that's the case here, but I just don't think we should be so quick to believe either side at this stage.
I'm going to call you out on that. I think, I've got trusted colleagues in Ukraine who are documenting what they're seeing. You run the risk, I think, of applying a degree of moral equivalence here and relativism, big words, which mean we are judging the two different sides unfairly. I think it's obvious that war crimes have been committed. I think we have to trust the judgment of people on the ground. Chip Chapman, am I right?
Yeah, of course you are. And unbridled power and unbridled corrupted morality gives you the intent to do those things which are war crimes. It is, what happens in the heat of battle where someone may kill someone and you can never take a bullet back is very unfortunate, and that is still a crime. But to have unarmed civilians who have their hands tied behind their back with a bullet in the back of their head is premeditated murder. It's then a scale when it becomes genocide.
Is it bad generalship? Is it a loss of control of troops on the ground? Because we know there's a reason why the Geneva Convention encourages sides to take prisoners. Because it's in your interest to make sure they don't fight to the death. That's one of the arguments, isn't it? If you are showing the Ukrainians as a Russian general, then actually you'll be killed no matter what. That's folly. That's stupid.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to this. The first bit is the political part. The political part is that Putin set the agenda for this. So before the invasion, it was a steady statehood has been in place in Ukraine. That is exactly the same words that Stalin used prior to the invasion of Poland in 1939. They've also said that the Ukrainians, they need to have the final solution for the Ukrainians. That was in one of Putin's speeches. That sort of rhetoric sets the stage for the actions of the military. Unless they are schooled in the laws of armed conflict and rules of engagement, then again you have this power of people with weapons who've been compromised with their own morality, which can lead to these awful acts.
I didn't mean to be dismissive of
that
question. I think it's a legitimate question, isn't it?
Because, it's only because I've seen, especially, and I've spoken to people that are quite close with people in the eastern region that say, they have faced a lot of, if you want to call it persecution, for being ethnically Russian, and they've had to face that, and we don't seem to have that conversation. We don't seem to have the conversation about, even if it is a small percentage of Nazi-led Azov battalion in the military. We don't ever seem to have that conversation. Now, I'm not saying if this is right or wrong, but why is it the point of the media is to be impartial to a degree. So why can we not question both sides? I'm not condoning Russia invading Ukraine at all.
The danger is we're into this sort of hybrid warfare now, where to some degree, to entertain those questions is to act as an apologist. Now, there are degrees and shades. I totally agree with that. But
I wouldn't agree with that.
Well, I think...
Because that suppresses conversation. If you're going to say, we can't even question it, then that's like, I remember I was quite young at the time, but I was questioning, weapons of mass destruction. And I was told the same thing. You shouldn't even ask those questions. Where are the weapons of mass destruction? No. So I think we enter dangerous ground if we cannot even question.
Yeah, OK. So, some things are demonstrable, aren't they? So... there were conspiracy theories about 9/11, and it's possible to debunk most of those absurd conspiracy theories. You mentioned weapons of mass destruction. I was in Iraq with the American army. We were at the tip of the spear, as they said. I remember, and this is the answer I always give to people who peddle conspiracy theories. You may remember, Chip Chapman, as we were roaring northwards toward Baghdad. Yeah. What you won't know, I was embedded with the Associated Press and CBS, and we found a cache of what may have been WMD. It would have been the easiest conspiracy theory in the world to pull off. They took them off for analysis. They could have told us within an hour, we've done it, guys. We found weapons of mass destruction. They came back within 2 or 3 and said, nah, they weren't.
Well, I think there are things which are just wrong or right, and all this is wrong. There are no shades of grey within this. And this really plays into what we would call just war theory. So at the start of the invasion, just war theory would tell you, jus ad bellum, Latin, is that which causes or justifies war. Nothing in Putin's invasion justifies what's been going on. The second aspect of this is jus in bello, conduct in war. This is not warlike conduct. This is just murderous activity by barbarians acting outside any laws of armed conflict. There's no arguing with that. That is just fact.
Personally, again, I would just think how the media post-2014 had so much to say about Ukraine, the atrocities
This is
going
not
on
a
in
media
Ukraine.
question. This is a morality question.
No, I understand
you either
that,
believe
but all
that
of that's
this is
forgotten
wrong,
now.
or you believe that there's something in the middle which is great.
I understand
you
that.
cannot have it either way.
But all of the conversation with regards to Ukraine and the issues going on with Ukraine and the conflict with the people to the eastern region, it was covered massively, and all of a sudden, that's just under the carpet. So why are we not...
I think there's one absolutely legitimate question there, which is why do some stories maintain persistent media interest, and why do the media sometimes lose interest? I was there a couple of times in Ukraine in 2014, and I remember seeing subsequently a picture of the airport at Donetsk after the media interest had gone, and it had gone from being a very modern big airport built for international football matches to a pile of rubble and masonry. And you think, well, why is that story not being told? The truth is, it's very difficult, actually, for the media to keep to maintain public interest. This story is sadly and tragically different because every single week there is a new horror, a new horror. And that's
I agree. In terms of, I see where you're coming from in terms of morality. The problem is, again, for the people at home and for the people like myself that may not have studied war extensively, I think it's dangerous territory to tell a group of people never to ask questions, because we know historically one of the greatest things used in war is propaganda. So why would one side use it and the other side not? So
This is not propaganda. It's people being killed by bullets in the back of their head.
There's a chance that both sides could be using propaganda.
We will get to the bottom. I mean, there will be people who will say, you know, maybe those bodies could have been laid in the road. You know, I think that's deep.
I'm not even saying that.
No, I know, but that's unbelievably far-fetched. And it's
I've not once said that, because that's insensitive. It could be. I'm not going to speak about whether it's the dead.
Anyway.
I'm just saying there's nothing wrong with having questions about both sides. We're supposed to be a people of, you know, having freedom of speech, expression, and questioning. That's how you learn.
That's all true, but eventually you have to come down on one side of the fence, don't you? Otherwise, hideous tyrants like this keep on getting away with it, you know, and we don't act accordingly. Chip, while you're here, let's reflect, if you wouldn't mind, on... I see you wearing your parachute. Is it your parachute regiment tie?
It's the 40th anniversary today of the date that the task force set sail for the Falklands. So I've been at St Paul's Cathedral for a service of remembrance and reflection this morning.
And we were talking about reasons for war casus belli. There are people, you know, Lynn wasn't even born then, wouldn't want one for years, but, you know, when Thatcher decided to commission that mission to recapture the Falkland Islands, there were many people in politics who said it was madness, but she felt it was right and justice had to be served. Yeah,
well, again, if you look at two just wars, why was the Falklands just? It was because under Article 51, UN Charter, we had a right of self-defence after another country had invaded the Falklands, and Russia has invaded Ukraine. So this is one of the most morally just wars, probably since the Second World War, to be put up there alongside the Falklands. And that is why there is no morality here in terms of what is right or wrong. If you support the Russians in this, your mind has been hacked by Russian propaganda.
OK, we've made that very clear. I'm glad we had the conversation.
And I'm not supporting Russia.
No. OK, great. We're going to move on. Thanks, guys. Now, the official list of Covid-19 symptoms on the NHS has been extended to cover 9 new symptoms, including sore throat, fatigue and headache. They join the 3 symptoms of a fever, a new and persistent cough, and a loss or change in taste or smell. Joining me now to discuss this, NHS doctor Emeka Okorocha. Doctor, thanks for your time, as ever. There will, of course, be those people scratching their heads thinking, well, hang on, we're 2 years into this now. How can we only now decide that these deserve to be part of the definition of what a symptom is for COVID?
I think so. These are now new definitions of symptoms here in the NHS. But for many of us working, we were following a little bit of a different protocol. So if you look at the CDC, the Centre for Disease Control, and the WHO, World Health Organization, a number of these symptoms were already put on their list as symptoms that could be from COVID. And a number of the people, obviously, who'd come into hospital had tested positive with these symptoms, not the 3 symptoms that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, such as the fever and the shortness of breath and persistent cough. I think also during a change of the different variants, we saw, especially with the Omicron variant, that a number of people had more milder symptoms of, sore throat, sneezing and loss of sense of smell rather than the fever and persistent cough. Possibly this could be the fact that many of us were vaccinated, and so the symptoms that we were coming with were milder and changed, or it could just be the change in the variants. But I think it's interesting now because since April 1st, the universal testing and the free universal testing has been scrapped. And so a number of different people will be wondering, I have these symptoms, are they just common cold and flu symptoms, or do I actually have COVID, and how will I know? Because I can't get a free test.
Yeah. The test obviously remains the definitive way you realise you've got it. I just wonder, this list is so wide, it would encompass so many potential ailments at any one time, wouldn't it? I just wonder what purpose it really serves to expand it to this list, given that, one of the oldest problems in science is cause is not always correlation. There may be a correlation, but it may not be the cause.
Precisely. And these symptoms as well can be masking a number of other different conditions, such as, especially when you think of the variety of these symptoms, you could have gastric symptoms, you could have headache, you could have sore throat, you could have fever, you could have cough. There's so many different medical diagnoses that fall under an umbrella of all these symptoms. So you have to ask the reason why adding it now. We knew that these symptoms could potentially be COVID, and there are a number of different other symptoms which may not be on the list that people may have had and could have been positive for COVID-19 without having, the general symptoms that we had on the list previously. The thing is now, what's the implication of this, especially with people being advised to potentially take 5 days in isolation, however, not legally now required to take 5 days in isolation. And if you're not being funded by the government for statute, pay off work, you're going to ask yourself, why am I going to take time off work thinking I have COVID if, one, I can't afford a test because they're not free, two, it's actually going to hamper my work pay. What's the benefit of it?
Yeah. Doctor, we may be straying into political territory, but you seem to be indicating that doing away with free COVID tests was a bad thing. I think it was costing a fair few bob, wasn't it, of taxpayers' money. Do you think it was a mistake for the government to scrap free tests?
Of course, I think that obviously testing is beneficial because that's what we do in medicine. You need to test to diagnose. I think there are a number of obviously political decisions that went into it, weighing up with the economic value of testing and obviously moving forward with the government's living with COVID strategy, which is suggesting that people take time off work if possible, they feel they're positive. But then you have to rely on people to actually go ahead and now pay, to diagnose themselves, to take off time off work, which may cost them even more money. And I think a number of people now, even if they feel they may have COVID, one, will just be taking sick days if they have certain symptoms, or they may be going into work with COVID, and that obviously poses its own problems.
Doctor, for now, thanks ever so much. Lynn May's alongside me. Just briefly, thought on free tests. Would you with the government on this? It's taxpayers' money. We've spent a lot.
I just think we need to treat it like the cold now. We've done what was said. Most of us are vaccinated. And I just think, and for those who not, it's their choice. And the symptoms are like fatigue. So am I supposed to now take time off of work because I'm slightly tired? We're all tired, So I just think we just have to build up our resilience, our immunity, and just get on with life.
That's pithy. We like that. We like pithy. Thanks very much. Coming up next on the show, we're going to be discussing if the government is doing the right thing by selling off Channel 4. And we want to hear from you, so do please get in touch. Usual address, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, a short break and the latest news headlines.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point. We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, but to the point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, it's 4:31. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky says Russia has committed the most terrible war crimes since World War II. Speaking via video link at the United Nations Security Council in New York, he warned of what he called further Russian cruelty in other Ukrainian towns and villages. It followed the UN chief Antonio Guterres saying the invasion is one of the greatest challenges ever to international world order. President Zelensky added that Moscow wanted to turn Ukraine into silent slaves.
Russian troops are deliberately destroying Ukrainian cities to ashes with artillery and airstrike. They are deliberately blocking city, creating mass starvation. They deliberately shoot columns of civilians on the road trying to escape from the territory of hostilities. They even deliberately blow up shelters where civilians hide from airstrike.
Meanwhile, Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, is urging the EU to cut all commercial ties with Moscow, saying all payments to Russia are bloody money. NATO's Secretary-General says Russia is guilty of war crimes and Vladimir Putin must face justice. Jens Stoltenberg has said foreign ministers will discuss sending more weapons to Ukraine when they meet on Wednesday and Thursday. Here in the UK, the government has commissioned a review of the latest scientific evidence on fracking. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has written to the British Geological Survey asking for a report on the latest evidence around the extraction of shale gas. Since 2019, there has been suspension on the process as it is not possible to accurately predict tremors associated with fracking. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Brazier.
Well, now, since Richard Whiteley launched Countdown 40 years ago, Channel 4 has persistently redefined British telly. Huge critical successes and some much-loved comedies, for instance, like Father Ted, The Inbetweeners, or novel ways of televising sport, Test cricket, Italian football in the early days. But the controversies are legion. Big Brother ushered in what many considered to be a rush to the bottom, with no cow too sacred, no idea too squalid. And then there were the allegations of bias. It's one thing to offer an opinion. I do that all the time. But this channel isn't owned by the state. Channel 4 is. But that didn't stop it striking. What its detractors felt was a persistently partial pose. Not even the BBC would retain a main news anchor who apparently told onlookers that it was time to F-word the Tories. Well, the government says Channel 4 isn't being punished for its ideological transgressions. It's been sold off so it can compete with the big boys of modern TV, the Amazons and the Apples, which have huge content budgets and make Channel 4 and others, frankly, look like tiddlers. So our debate today, should Channel 4 be privatised? Joining me, the former head of Channel 4 News and Current Affairs, Dorothy Byrne, currently president of Mary Edwards College, Cambridge, and the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie. Welcome to you both. Kelvin, if I can start with you, what's the case against Channel 4?
Well, they've had an average to poor run. The percentage of all TV is remarkably low. But the reality is that free-to-air networks are going down in value, both in the UK and all around the world. Look at the state of a successful company like ITV, whose share price basically gives it a value of about 3 billion. That's why Channel 4 won't get $1 billion, because frankly, it's not worth it. And then when you look at their creative output, which all their supporters, of which they mainly seem to be lefties, frankly, let's be honest about it. Basically, it boils down to naked attraction, right? In which you get you get the family jewels out and get paid for it, and also Gogglebox, I think, and then the one that they bought in, which was the Great British Bake Off. And if that's what 40 years of creativity means, then frankly, if they get any money at all for this network, they should grab it right now.
Dorothy Byrne, Kelvin Mackenzie delicately describes the crown jewels. I think we know what he means, that sense in which Channel 4 pushed the boundaries of public service broadcasting in a way that people didn't always find edifying.
Well, one way in which we pushed the bounds of public service broadcasting was that Kelvin Mackenzie and I made a film for Channel 4 together called How to Save the Tories. And I think this was an excellent union of two different people. Kelvin actually ran out of ideas of how to save the Tories, and I had to help him fill in a few extra ones in order that we could reach 49 minutes. But the best bit in the programme, one of the best moments in British television, was when Kelvin explained that the reason the Tories were going badly was that their leader was bald, and said the Tories would never win with a bald leader. And Kelvin then put on a Margaret Thatcher wig. This was all on TV, and it's there for posterity. And the really strange thing, one of the magnificent moments of Channel 4, was that when Kelvin Mackenzie puts on a wig, he looks just like Margaret Thatcher. It's extraordinary.
Well, I tell you what, Dorothy Byrne, I did expect this debate would yield some interesting conclusions. That wasn't one of them. Sorry, Kelvin, go on.
Well, look, I don't doubt that putting a wig on me makes me more attractive. It's hard to be the reverse, wouldn't it? But on the serious note, the government should grab whatever money it can get hold of for a free-to-air network. If you talk to network providers in the US, the majors there, free-to-air networks are in massive decline. They can't find an audience. The audience that they can find doesn't seem to be attractive to advertisers. And what is happening is that the great television of our time, and I would recommend Disney Plus's Dope Sick and or The Dropout in that respect, all the great stuff, all the great movies are now being made by streamers. Now, I think that Channel 4 is not doing well now, and will actually, strangely, this is why I'm in favour of flogging it, right, will actually do even worse. I mean, they'll end up, they haven't even been as successful as Channel 5 of late. I mean, it is really a shocking state of affairs, and we should grab the money and grab it now. The government has no right to own TV. By the way, I'm not in favour of them being in the BBC business either. I'd flog that all off as well. But if Channel 4 is the beginning of what I think might be an argument, for instance, to say goodbye to, BBC Two and say goodbye to some of the radio exclusive networks, then that would be a good start as well.
Well, Dorothy Byrne, do you think this is the first shot in a bigger culture war by Nadine Dorries that ultimately leads us towards the BBC?
I don't think that this is about a culture war. I do think it's about the Tories throwing a bit of red meat to their right-wing supporters because they're in so much trouble. Let's look at some facts here. Channel 4's value to Britain is not about its financial value if it's flogged off. I actually think Kelvin is right. I don't think it's worth £1 billion. And I think that if the government puts in place restrictions saying it has to make news in prime time, etc., it will be worth less. But Channel 4 is of great value in British public life and debate. For example, it's just won almost every award going for It's a Sin. And that is an example of why it's irrelevant to say that Channel 4 should be competing with Netflix.
Oh, that sounds a bit terminal for Dorothy Byrne. We'll try and fiddle with the cables and see what comes back. Sorry, Dorothy Byrne, we just lost your signal there. Let me just go back to Kelvin Mackenzie if I could. In fact, no, let me put this one to you, Dorothy, and then we'll go to Kelvin Mackenzie. Do you think there were things that Channel 4 did, particularly in news and current affairs, which harmed its reputation, gave it a reputation for being excessively left-wing? I mean, I can think of numerous examples. Here's one alternative Christmas message delivered by, who was it, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, then the leader of Iran and no friend of democracy.
That is not why Channel 4 is being privatised. It's not being privatised because the government objects to a few things which it did. I don't think putting Ahmadinejad on television making the Christmas message could be reviewed in any way as being left-wing, by the way. And that short Christmas message before it had a long film showing just how bad Iran's record is. But I think the more important point here is that the channel makes important public service television, which is valued in this country. It might not be valued by Kelvin. And if you were to privatise it, there will be less of that. The government will get hardly any money for it anyway. And it will damage the independent production sector in this country, which currently gets to the tune of £700 million, money invested in it through being commissioned to make independent productions.
Kelvin Mackenzie, give you the last word.
Well, I don't drop a tear for whoever the production company is for Naked Attraction, who I do suspect will find difficulty flogging that particular idea to the new owners, who I look forward to. And I should imagine, by the way, ITV will be buying it at about 100 miles an hour. They'll be the biggest bidder, and then we'll be able to be an entertainment network, which I am in favour. I'm not in favour of more kind of left of centre news. There's enough of it on the BBC.
Kelvin Mackenzie, Dorothy Byrne, thanks both very much indeed. Lynn May is alongside me. Channel 4, Lynn, anything? Watch it?
I don't know why people are getting quite upset by this, because firstly, I think many people, specifically young people, didn't even know that the government were involved in it. And secondly, I don't think the government should own any channel. I just wish it would have been the BBC first, so I don't have to pay TV licence.
Do you pay a TV licence?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Maybe just, okay, we'll take you at your word, Lynn May.
You calling me a liar?
I'm not, certainly not. Here's another story we're going to just reflect on briefly, and it's this. Elon Musk buying shares on Twitter, big proportion of Twitter shares. He's become the largest single holder of shares in the company. So here's a question. Is he going to save free speech on that platform? Lynn May, you use Twitter?
I do, yeah.
Do you feel recently, as some do feel, that it's perhaps not the platform for free speech enthusiasts that it was?
Yeah, and we can see that with, deplatforming Trump. And I said this yesterday, and many might disagree, but I think give everyone back their platform, whether that's Katie Hopkins, Trump, Wiley, so on and so forth. Yeah, we may not like the views of those people, but I think...
Everybody gets a platform on Twitter? Everyone?
I think
Vladimir Putin right now?
I think, well, the Chechen leader has one on there. No one's taken him off. The Taliban has a Twitter. So who's making the decisions here? But I think in terms of Elon Musk, he's an advocate for freedom of speech and expression. So I hope that he's going to have a huge part to play in ensuring that is maintained.
Yeah. How lovely to have so much money that you can put yourself into. So somebody's... Oh, have a look at the poll. I'm going to show a poll. Let's show a poll. I can't hear what they're trying to say. But we'll try and get a poll on later that reflects this. You've been voting on it, so we'll tell you about that. Coming up, we'll be discussing the ban on top footballers and celebrities being allowed to appear in gambling ads, and we'll be discussing if British soap operas have fell victim to a woke agenda. First, it's time for the break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Footballers and celebrities, they will no longer be allowed to appear in gambling adverts under new rules brought in by UK gambling regulators. These new regulations also include a ban on showing teams' kits and stadiums in adverts and in video game content. Let's turn to Lynn May, who's my studio guest today, to reflect on this one. There is obviously a problem with gambling amongst young people who see people on TV, online, who they admire and who are selling them a message about gambling that it's really cool.
Yeah. I'm not the type of person to say, you know, we shouldn't advertise certain things that people wouldn't agree with. But where there's this emerge with social media, and most ages can access social media, I think it's very damaging to have certain things advertised, and gambling is definitely one of them. National statistics in 2019 said there's 55,000 11 to 16-year-olds who have a gambling issue. Can you imagine an 11-year-old having a gambling issue? How are they even getting the money? There's parents that are coming out saying, you know, my son and daughter was stealing from me, my credit card. And if they're seeing their icon on social media advertising, almost saying, you know, gambling is a good thing, then what do we expect? So something needed to be done.
Amongst your peers, how many people are doing sort of in-game betting? Because that wasn't a thing, you know, growing up, and it's become a thing now, right? People are watching the game, smartphone in hand, placing bets on really quite detailed elements of what's happening right in front of their eyes in real time.
Yeah, I just think it's a lot more accessible. So I don't think, in terms of like my social group, there's not really an issue going on there. However, when you used to, even things like the lottery, you'd have to go in store, you'd have to jot down the numbers, you know, that's taken away. So once you're on your phone, you might press, you know, 20 lucky dips just because of the ease of it, as opposed to, you know, having to go to the store. And that increases the problem.
Yeah. Did we have an argument about the National Lottery the other week?
I think we did.
We're not going to revisit that one. I think we may have that poll on Elon Musk. We can't show. Let me describe it. Let me describe what it's saying, because I think it's quite interesting. A lot of you voted, 4,000 of you getting on for. The question was, as Elon Musk becomes the largest investor in Twitter, getting over 10% of Twitter he now owns, huge stake given how much it costs. And we're asking, is it time Twitter lifted the Trump ban? Can he? I mean, with 10% of the stake, he's the biggest shareholder in Twitter now, but does that afford him the shareholder clout to get his way on this one and rescind the Trump ban? 82% of you say Trump ought to be allowed back on. There's 24 minutes left on that vote. 3,833 of you say that Trump ought to be allowed back on Twitter, and Lynn May, that's what you think.
I do, yeah.
Because you believe in an open skies policy when it comes to Twitter. Nobody should be barred from it.
No one should, unless there's a clear evidence of a criminal offence. I think everyone should be able to use Twitter. And like I said before, the Taliban are on Twitter. There's various questionable people on Twitter. So why some and not the others? So then what is the bar? Who makes those decisions? So just, and I think for those also, there's this big conversation around, be kind or we're hurting people's feelings, but literally anything can hurt someone's feelings. So if you feel at home or whatever that you're being offended continuously by opinions and views, come off of Twitter. No one's forcing you to be on there.
Just one final thought on the Elon Musk story, because I know for some people he's a bête noire, isn't he? He's a sort of panto villain. He's got too much money. He spends it on the wrong things. I'm a great fan. I think he's terrific.
Yeah.
And I think he's also an antidote to this gathering sense shared by many people. I'm one of them. That the corporate world is woke. It's out of control. It's deeply anti-democratic. There's a group of highly networked, highly credentialed people at the top of most organisations who all think pretty much the same. And they are increasingly using their corporate platforms to express political ideologies, which they never run the risk of putting to the test of the people who actually work there, the cleaners, the security guards, the people doing the less well-paid jobs. They're deeply anti-democratic. But here is someone who is a paragon of capitalism, Elon Musk, keeps coming up with these brainwaves, Tesla, SpaceX, whatever it is, making shed loads of money. And actually, turns out he's quite good for free speech. We rejoice, therefore.
Yeah, and it balances the scales. We need equilibrium. Yeah. And a lot of these corporates, they're just doing it. They're fake. Because when you look, like you said, at the people that work for them, their policy, even the supply chains,
Yeah. Well, the supply chains have to fall into line, don't they?
There you go.
Yesterday, we learned of the death of one of Britain's best-loved soap stars, June Brown, who played Dot Cotton in EastEnders. For decades, Cotton, cigarette in mouth and drink in hand, was a curmudgeonly presence on Albert Square. Apologies if you're listening on the radio. We've just thrown up a picture of her with Dan Wootton when he was a show business correspondent. Now we're looking at her in characteristic pose in the laundrette here, Albert Square, through the ages. Latterly, she hinted that soap operas like EastEnders had become too woke to watch. To take but one example, all of them carried storylines about environmental catastrophes in the run-up to COP26 last year. Let us know your views on this. Give us examples you feel demonstrate the truth of the idea that soap operas have become too woke to watch. What's the wokest thing you've seen on the soaps, and what is your favourite soap memory, perhaps of Dot Cotton in particular? It turns out that Lynn May is a massive EastEnders fan.
We have to keep that on the DL. I can't say massive, but no, I do. That's my guilty pleasure. And my mum, my dad, my family, why do you still watch that? But I religiously watch EastEnders, and I think she's right. And people that say it's going too woke, I watch EastEnders just for light-hearted, meaningless entertainment. I don't turn it on to be preached to or to be taught about certain social politics, and that's the way it's heading. And I don't think we're going to see people like Dot Cotton anymore.
There's a dictum now. I think it might reflect sometimes wishful thinking. Go woke, go broke. I mentioned cause being, and correlation earlier to a previous guest. It may just be coincidental that they've gone woke and nobody watches them anymore. In the mid-1980s, EastEnders was reaching highs of 30 million viewers. They're now down to, they'll hit lows of 1-point-something million. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think I am. Now, that may just be because we're too busy on these. It may be because people just don't relate to the storylines anymore.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily, to do with the woke ideology of it all. It's definitely off-putting, because sometimes I even turn it off. I'm like, what the hell is this? But I think it's more to do with, like you said, television stats in terms of viewership is plummeting. And there's just so much more to watch. Before, you'd only have, even me, still being a young person, but there was only 1 to 5.
How much of how much of a foothold in reality do soaps need to have? So, for instance, you're quite unusual, as a black woman growing up in a presumably very white rural village, mixed. Yeah, thank you, thank you. But it's a pretty unusual experience. I caught sight of Emmerdale, used to be Emmerdale Farm a while ago, and I thought, for a village in North Yorkshire, that's remarkably diverse. That does not reflect reality, right? I mean,
yeah. To be honest with you, I do think EastEnders has got it right in terms of the diversity. And, you know, somewhere in the east of London it's supposed to be, I assume, that's pretty much how it does look.
Right.
However, you're not going to have certain conversations, maybe more actually. You are going to have these societal conversations just because how overly exposed everyone is. So I'm not going to say no conversation should be taking place because that doesn't reflect reality. But it's like it takes a stance. So, for example, they had a character on there and he was massively racist. But then they connected racism, I think, to Brexit, which isn't the case. I voted for Brexit. I'm not racist.
It's really naughty.
And that really, really got me angry because you're kind of leading the viewership down a path of this is what we think. And that's not impartial, and that's why I have issues sometimes with BBC. Yeah. But that's what I mean. I don't think there's anything wrong with having those conversations, but provide balance.
Yeah. You remember HSBC ran the ad?
What was their ad?
Group, well, we'll talk about it during the commercial break, but they ran an ad that was sort of not suggesting people were... Well, it hinted at a sort of degree of xenophobia in people who voted for Brexit. I'll put it no firmly than that, because their lawyers might be watching. It's time for the weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A windy day to come on Wednesday, a different feel for many as well, a colder feeling day. There'll be some sunshine, but there will be a whole raft of showers. Mild air has been sitting across most of the country, but just poking out across the far north, colder air here, and where we've had this weather front sitting, that has been producing some heavy snowfall, which continues well into the evening. Aberdeenshire, Moray, Caithness, Sutherland seeing several more centimetres in places. That turns to rain and pushes north, ends up being a very wet and windy night across Orkney. Elsewhere, we'll see showers, bands of showers zipping southwards. It will be a relatively mild night for most, but a colder feel on Wednesday, which will, broadly speaking, be a day of sunshine and showers. There will be some heavy showers, but they will tend to zip through because of the strength of the breeze. It stays very wet and windy across Orkney, and the showers across Scotland may, over the hills, turn back to snow later on. But for most, it'll be rain showers with sunny spells in between. Temperatures still up to double figures, maybe up into the mid-teens across the southeast, but feeling colder than today as that wind strengthens. Could get very windy on Wednesday night across Northern Ireland, western parts of Scotland. A potential for more wet weather to come into parts of the south as well. Some uncertainty about the northward extent of that rain. Certainly further north, the showers will keep going and they'll start to turn more to sleet and snow once more, even to low levels across parts of Scotland. Maybe a wet start then for southeastern areas on Thursday, but that should scoot away, and then we'll have some sunny spells. But there will be more showers coming in across northern Britain. A wintry flavour, snow on hills, sleet, hail at low levels. Some good spells of sunshine, however. But look at the temperatures. Single figures for the vast majority on Thursday. Add on that wind, and it will feel bitter.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity. That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Just gone 5 o'clock, coming up live at 5, all the latest from Ukraine. Plus, has the government finally got a clue about how to solve the Channel migrant crisis? Reports suggest Boris Johnson is about to sign off a plan to send asylum seekers to be processed by Rwanda. Travellers abandoned their luggage to make their flights. Why were airports caught out by a post-COVID Easter holiday rush? Also, should the world number 2 tennis player be banned from Wimbledon for being Russian? And Stephen Hawking said, we shouldn't announce to the galaxy where we are, so are scientists right to send a radio message into deep space bearing the precise coordinates for planet Earth? Joining me to ponder on those stories today, the commentator Lynn May, who was chuckling about Stephen Hawking's warning. But first, the latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 5 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's president has called for Nuremberg-style trials after accusing Russia of committing what he called the most terrible war crimes since World War II. Speaking via video link at the United Nations Security Council in New York, Vladimir Zelensky warned of further Russian cruelty in other Ukrainian towns and villages. He also described in detail the attacks across the country.
Russian troops are deliberately destroying Ukrainian cities to ashes with artillery and airstrike. They are deliberately blocking city, creating mass starvation. They deliberately shoot columns of civilians on the road trying to escape from the territory of hostilities. They even deliberately blow up shelters where civilians hide from airstrikes.
Vladimir Zelensky there, also speaking at the UN Security Council. Nations Chief Antonio Guterres said Russia's invasion of Ukraine is one of the greatest challenges ever to international world order.
I'm also deeply shocked by the personal testimony of rapes and sexual violence that now are emerging. The High Commissioner for Human Rights has spoken of possible war crimes, grave breaches of international humanitarian law, and serious violations of international human rights law. And the Russian offensive has also led to the displacement of more than 10 million people in just 1 month, the fastest forced population movement since the Second World War.
Antonio Guterres there. The mayor of the Ukrainian town of Bucha has asked residents to wait before returning to their homes as the area is still unsafe. He warned of mines in the area as discarded weaponry is being cleared from the streets. The mayor accused Russian troops of deliberately killing civilians during their month-long occupation of the town in the Kiev region. The Kremlin denies the allegations. Meanwhile, Kiev's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, has urged European politicians to cut all commercial ties with Moscow, saying all payments to Russia are bloody money.
Stop commercial communication with Russia, because every euro, every cent, what you receive from Russians or what you send to Russia have blood, is bloody money. In the blood of this money, it's Ukrainian blood.
NATO has said Ukraine's pushback has forced Russia to change its plans and refocus on the eastern region of Donbass. NATO Secretary-General says foreign ministers will discuss sending more weapons to Ukraine when they meet later in the week. Jens Stoltenberg condemned the atrocities in Bucha and other towns and cities across Ukraine. He said it's clear Russia has committed war crimes and that Vladimir Putin must face justice.
This is unbearable brutality that Europe has not witnessed in many decades. Targeting and murdering civilians is a war crime. All the facts must be established, and all those responsible for these atrocities must be brought to justice.
Here in the UK, the government has commissioned a review of the latest scientific evidence on fracking. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has written to the British Geological Survey asking for a report on the latest evidence around the extraction of shale gas. Since 2019, there has been suspension on the process as it is not possible to accurately predict tremors associated with fracking. Mr. Kwarteng says the government will explore all possible domestic energy sources in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Pupil school attendances for COVID-related reasons have fallen over the past fortnight, but school leaders are still concerned about attendance rates. School and college unions say there's been greater COVID-related disruption over the past few weeks than at any previous point during the pandemic. They're calling on the Education Secretary to reinstate free lateral flow tests for pupils and staff. Government data shows almost 180,000 pupils were off school because of COVID, with nearly 9% of teachers at the end of last month. Climate activists Just Stop Oil have blocked a main road near Kingsbury Oil Terminal in Warwickshire by climbing on top of an oil tanker. They're ignoring a temporary High Court injunction by preventing tankers from entering and exiting the site. Activists have been blocking access to oil terminals over the past 5 days, demanding that the government stops new oil and gas projects. And Tiger Woods says he plans to compete in the 86th Masters this week, less than 14 months after suffering serious injuries in a car crash. The 15-time major winner, who feared his right leg would have to be amputated following the crash, has not contested a top-level event since the 2020 Masters. Woods has won the Augusta Masters 5 times. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to Brazier.
We'll be reflecting on what's been happening in Ukraine very shortly, and President Zelensky gave a big address to the UN Security Council. But we're going to start with the story this afternoon. Plans to outsource the processing of asylum seekers is reportedly going ahead, with the Prime Minister expected to make an announcement soon. Boris Johnson wanted to announce a trial of the plans last week. It's been reported following another rise in migrant crossing numbers across the Channel. However, with the plans described as half-baked, according to a government source, the Prime Minister has held off from confirming the move. Well, the plans would see migrants flown to Rwanda. They would there have their asylum claims processed. Theory runs that it would be harder for applicants to disappear without trace, and over time, the prospect of being sent to Central Africa rather than a hotel in the UK would have a deterrent effect on would-be migrants, or so the logic runs. Joining me now, the director of the Henry Jackson Society, Alan Mendoza. Alan Mendoza, thanks for your time. This has been floated time and time again. It was going to be Ascension Island. It was going to be maybe one of the Channel Islands. Rwanda, I know there's a Scandinavian country looking seriously at it. I think it's signed a memorandum of understanding. How serious a plan is it?
Well, we don't know the level of seriousness of the plans. We haven't obviously seen the full plans and what stage they're at. Of course, this does come, as you say, at the end of a protracted period of trying to find an offshore, kind of solution to this problem. It is clear that Rwanda is a destination that's being thought about by a number of countries, and it might in fact be a boom industry for Rwanda. But I think it's right to say that you have to see the plans before you can comment properly as to how viable this actually is.
Yeah, I mean, obviously cost is going to be a principal objection, isn't it? To fly people out there, to then have the accommodation for them. I mean, the accommodation is obviously going to be cheaper over time than in the UK. And the hope will be in government, presumably, if this is a goer, that actually it does have a deterrent effect. People are going to look at the idea of, if you are a confident asylum seeker, and put it that way, if you are confident your application will be smiled on by the authorities and you are genuinely a victim of persecution, then you may think, OK, it's worth spending 3 months in a processing centre in Rwanda. If you're somebody who's really an economic migrant, then the idea of Rwanda for a few months loses its lustre.
Yes, I think that's kind of right, and the sort of reasoning behind trying to find an offshore location like this. The point is not to dissuade legitimate, asylum seekers from this, but to those people looking for a soft touch, easy way in approach. This would no doubt deter them from doing so. On the cost side, actually, I think we might end up being quids in were this to be a case. I wish things were processed in 3 months. They often delay a lot longer than that, and the cost of accommodation in the UK is exorbitant for asylum seekers and migrants. So from that perspective, it might be a financial winner. But again, it all comes down to the detail and, of course, the conditions people be kept in. They have to obviously be kept in appropriate, safe conditions in Rwanda as well.
Spare a thought, Alan, for those in government who have to work through this problem. Because you can just see them, you can imagine them sort of gaming out a scenario where, yes, they get this through, they get the money from the Treasury, they get the processing centres set up, and then some pesky journalist on the Sunday Times or somewhere else comes up with a story saying, actually, there's some various abuses of the system going on, backhanders being paid. You're dealing with a country where the rule of law isn't what it is in the UK. It's a fact. You could see how one or two embarrassing stories sets the whole thing back to square one. That's the harsh reality.
Well, yes, of course, and that's why it's important to see the plans, and for them to be called half-baked or otherwise, we have to understand exactly what is being proposed. Obviously, there are pitfalls. I'm quite confident Rwanda would be able to keep to any agreement. I'm not so worried about that, but I do think you have to make sure that conditions are as appropriate as they would be in the UK. I think the great danger is to think, out of sight, out of mind, we're not so bothered. The reality is we still have a duty of care for people who are being processed, and we have to make sure that they are handled in a fair and legal process and in appropriate circumstances.
You can see, can't you, Alan, why the government is looking at these options? Because, my guest in the studio, Lynn May, was saying to me earlier, well, look, why don't you just get the French involved, deal with it on that side of the channel. But, I'm looking at pictures now that I could have filmed with a camera crew 20 years ago in Songat. It's in the French gift to sort this out, and our relationship with them oscillates, doesn't it? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Right now it's terrible. And if you want to, by the famous quote, take back control, if we really want to take control of what's happening in the channel, we've got to sort this problem out ourselves without relying on continental friends.
Yes, I'm afraid you can't rely on the French. They've got their own interests, of course, quite understandably, and it also is very expensive to deal with the French. Look at the deal, recently done where over the sort of crossings where we had to pay the French quite a lot of money to assist in this process. So it's not a cost-free option to rely on the French either. So yes, of course, it's something that the UK has to handle by itself, because you can't rely on others to determine your own migration policy and your own running of that policy. You've got to do it yourself. And that's why I think the government is, of course, tremendously interested in finding a solution like this that could perhaps lead to the numbers going down, but also making sure that legitimate seekers are treated fairly and appropriately.
Alan Mendoza from the Henry Jackson Society. Alan, thanks very much indeed for your time. Lynn May is alongside me in the studio with me today. This is a problem that needs to be gripped. Mm-hmm. Because as William Hague, a former Foreign Secretary, said in the Times 9 months ago, if you look at the people who want to move to the UK, mm-hmm. particularly from sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, where there is this demographic explosion, mm-hmm. people can't be blamed for wanting to improve the quality of their lives. And if it feels like there's a way to a better life, people are going to take it. The numbers keep tripling mm-hmm. year after year. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do?
I just think, well, there was a conversation with Albania, there was a conversation with Ghana, both fell through. And I just think the government on this is so out of touch. They think that people that are so desperate to get here for a better life. Now, I know we need to resolve the migrant crisis, undoubtedly. But first of all, the traffickers manipulate these people into making them believe here is paved with gold. When you have that and you live in a country that is so destitute, you will literally do anything to get here. So sending them to Rwanda for 6 months is not going to do much, for the simple fact that I went to Calais to see the issues there. A lot of Eritreans were there. Some as young as 11, 12 years old, and some were there for 3 years, and they would wake up at 4 a.m. every single morning to try and run alongside a truck, jump on it to get here. So if they're there for 3 years, sending them to Rwanda doesn't make much sense. Another thing is, we do not want to work with Russia because of the atrocities going on in Ukraine. We want to cut them off, right? Sanctions. So then why would we go to Rwanda when they're committing atrocities according to Republic Democratic of Congo, and they're saying that they need help dealing with Rwanda? So has the government not looked into the issues with Congo and Rwanda? So it's a bit hypocritical from where I'm looking at it.
Well, just on the point about whether your Eritreans would be deterred or not, let's say they disembark from a beach in a boat, they're picked up by the lifeboat service or whatever it is, and rather than then being returned to Dover or a Kentish port, they are put on a plane to Rwanda and they have their asylum claim processed. They are deemed to be economic migrants with no fit reason to be in the UK because they're not being persecuted.
Yeah.
And they're sent back to Eritrea.
Yeah.
Now, you say, well, they'll just start that process again. So they start the process again. Some of them may not start the process again. They may be deterred. And if you're in the business of stopping dozens of people drowning in the English Channel, this is the humanitarian method.
But it's going to cost us. Well, let's look at the flights. So we're going to fly them.
It costs us now. You're putting people up in hotels. It's costing millions.
But as he said, that we still have a duty of care. So we have to ensure that they have a standard of living in Rwanda. So does that mean, because we're going to pay Rwanda millions to facilitate that, and then we're going to have to put them in accommodation there and feed and clothe them? What's the difference?
Like I said to me, pity, spare a thought. Spare a thought for Priti Patel, not words you hear all that very often. We're going to move to our next story. It's about Easter travel. Well, not so much Easter travel. The situation that we had in recent days at the UK airports. 120 flights. We had 120 flights cancelled. That was yesterday. Today, we've got problems still. Airports struggling to cope with the numbers. EasyJet and British Airways, they're saying that rising staff COVID infections are part of the reason for cancellations. And I ought to say that more than 200 flights were also cancelled by EasyJet over the weekend. Let's turn to the CEO of Travel Consultants, the PC agency. That's Paul Charles. Paul Charles, welcome to you. Thanks for your time. How chaotic was it?
Well, it's getting more chaotic, sadly, as the days go on, because we're edging into that peak Easter period when more families especially go away at this time of year. If you look at the numbers, they're quite staggering. Over the last week, up until Sunday evening, there were over 1,100 cancellations of flights, both from and to the UK. Now, compare that with 2019, the last normal year before the pandemic. There were just 143 cancellations over the same period. So it's a staggering increase, partly due to COVID and self-isolation of staff, but also to the fact that there is a massive staff shortage in our airports and airlines, as they simply haven't been able to recruit fast enough.
And is this a sort of institutional failure in the sense that you had airlines and airports that just got used to having minimal levels of staffing during that sort of COVID depression, and they haven't sort of taken on enough people and restored manning levels to what they should be quickly enough?
Yes, I think that's part of it. Also, it's fear. It's fear among senior management at airlines and airports about how quickly the recovery would come back. If you bear in mind, they've been through terrible times over the last 2 years. The travel and tourism sector was one of the worst affected. And so they were nervous about recruiting again, just as the government was removing restrictions. And it wasn't until the UK government earlier this year removed those COVID tests for arriving passengers, plus the passenger locator form, that airlines took the decision to really start recruiting again, because they could see that the demand was starting to pick up. So the issue has been that we've got a gap between the recovery and that sudden snapback in demand, and the fact that airlines have not been able to recruit quickly enough. And it's very hard to find people in the current climate. A lot of people who were working in the industry left during the pandemic for jobs elsewhere, and then other sectors have been recruiting heavily at higher rates of pay, like IT, online retail, for example, which are sectors that are seen as more reassuring for people, if you like, during these times of COVID, when there could be another variant which might hurt the travel and tourism sector again. So that's the real problem. It's been a fear at the top about hiring too quickly, incurring cost, and the danger that they would be going back into a pandemic situation.
Paul, that snapback you described, how vigorous has it been I mean, obviously there's a lot of pent-up demand, and not just pent-up demand. Some people, not everybody, some people managed to save money. They weren't taking holidays, expensive holidays during COVID. They now feel that they can take them, they've got money to spend on them. So actually, providing there isn't some wretched new variant, as you indicate, there might be some nervousness still in the industry about whether that happens or not. Actually, there is, yes, you talk about a problem, but there's actually an opportunity here going forward, at least in the medium to long term.
Well, I've been travelling a lot in the last few weeks, and I can tell you every flight I've been on has been jam-packed. Definitely the snapback is very strong. There is enormous consumer demand to fly again or get on a train like Eurostar again, because people are going back to see family and friends they haven't been able to see in the last 2 years, or take a holiday. And of course, this is the time of year when the industry really picks up again. Easter onwards is a very busy time in normal times anyway. So airlines are confident, or were confident, that they could run 90% of their operations compared to how they were pre-pandemic. So they're confident, they're seeing the demand, but they can't deliver on the operations that they were promising. And that's why they're now cancelling as a result. They simply cannot deliver for that high consumer demand. And yes, it is surprising, bearing in mind the higher cost of living, bearing in mind the higher oil price is feeding through to higher ticket prices on planes. It's surprising to see so much consumer demand, perhaps, but it's there, and it's simply a case of not being able to manage it.
Yeah, but as you say, it's not just, I think you said people going to visit relatives they haven't seen for a year and more. This isn't just people fancying their, bucket and spade holiday on the Costas. This is people who haven't seen mum, brothers, dad, spouses, well, not spouses, people, loved ones far away. And of course, actually, yes, there may be a cost of living crisis, but this is expenditure that has to be made as far as many people are concerned.
Absolutely. Many people, you're bang on there, many people just want to get out and live in the now. They want to be seeing people they haven't seen for so long. They never know if there's another pandemic around the corner, or sadly another crisis involving war, for example. So they're desperate to see people. And you combine that with the fact that airlines reduce their frequencies and continue to do so with cancellations every day at the moment, then you're seeing more people having to get on to fewer flights. And that is exacerbating the problem that you're seeing at airports. I hate to say it, but I do feel as though we may see the police or even the army brought in at some of our airports to cope with the crowds and the problems that we're seeing, especially at Manchester Airport.
Goodness me. Paul Charles, on that note, thanks very much indeed. Paul Charles from the PC Agency there joining us. Lynn May's alongside me. Just now and again, you'll do an interview and you'll get a line at the end of the interview which almost floors you. Army called into airports to control the crowds, thinks.
It's the 9 new symptoms from COVID got everyone at home.
Is that what it is, do you think?
Well, there's staffing issues. And as Emeka, the doctor, said, people should be staying at home for 5 days. It's not a legal requirement, but if that's the suggestion, and I know I can call in and say, I've got a sore throat and I'm slightly tired, it might be COVID, but I don't have the money to get a test to check, but that's what it is, you're going to have loads of people off, aren't you?
Yeah, but you are a natural sceptic, which is great. Lynn May. Coming up next, we're going to speak to a dairy farmer as their produce prices are set to reach record highs, not just what is going out of the farm gate, but what goes in, the red diesel, the fertiliser, all the rest of it, rocketing in price because of what's happening in Ukraine and before then, in fact. But first, we've got the weather for you.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A windy day to come on Wednesday, a different feel for many as well, a colder feeling day. There'll be some sunshine, but there will be a whole raft of showers. Mild air has been sitting across most of the country, but just poking out across the far north, colder air here, and where we've had this weather front sitting, that has been producing some heavy snowfall, which continues well into the evening. Aberdeenshire, Moray, Caithness, Sutherland seeing several more centimetres in places. That turns to rain and pushes north, ends up being a very wet and windy night across Orkney. Elsewhere, we'll see showers, bands of showers zipping southwards. It will be a relatively mild night for most, but a colder feel on Wednesday, which will, broadly speaking, be a day of sunshine and showers. There will be some heavy showers, but they will tend to zip through because of the strength of the breeze. It stays very wet and windy across Orkney, and the showers across Scotland may, over the hills, turn back to snow later on. But for most, it'll be rain showers with sunny spells in between. Temperatures still up to double figures, maybe up into the mid-teens across the southeast, but feeling colder than today as that wind strengthens. Could get very windy on Wednesday night across Northern Ireland, western parts of Scotland. A potential for more wet weather to come into parts of the south as well. Some uncertainty about the northward extent of that rain. Certainly further north, the showers will keep going and they'll start to turn more to sleet and snow once more, even to low levels across parts of Scotland. Maybe a wet start then for southeastern areas on Thursday, but that should scoot away, and then we'll have some sunny spells. But there will be more showers coming in across northern Britain. A wintry flavour, snow on hills, sleet, hail at low levels. Some good spells of sunshine, however. But look at the temperatures. Single figures for the vast majority on Thursday. Add on that wind, and it will feel bitter.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, even folk whose knowledge of farming doesn't really extend beyond that parody of rural life, BBC Countryfile, they'll know that dairy farmers have been in trouble in recent years. It's been almost impossible for them to make money. Sometimes it's been cheaper to actually pour milk away. They've been squeezed by supermarkets and rising costs. Now, Ukraine has seen fertiliser prices rocket and the price of red diesel hit unheard of highs. What does this mean potentially for you? A pack of butter expected to hit £2 a pack. Sort of depends on the size of the pack, doesn't it? But it's going to rise sharply. And milk may get 50% more expensive, according to some reports over the weekend. Joining me, Abby Reader, dairy farmer and Deputy President of the National Farmers Union in Wales. Abby Reader, thanks so much for your time. There are, I'll always, you do, whenever you do agriculture items, you get, it divides, you'll get plenty of sympathetic emails, but you'll get a hardcore of people who say, oh, there we go, farmers moaning again, they're all sending their kids to private schools and driving Range Rovers. What say you?
Well, I don't drive a Range Rover. My Land Rover's parked behind me. Look, I think dairy farms are under an immense amount of pressure at the minute, as are a lot of the agricultural sectors, because we're seeing rising costs, just like any other business might be seeing at the moment. Now, normally, consumers may not necessarily see that impact on the food that they buy, because generally these things will iron themselves out. Perhaps if I'm having a problem based here in Wales, it might not be so bad in Scotland or in England. Or we may be able to make up for a shortage of supply by looking globally. But what we've got at the minute is an issue throughout the globe. So we're seeing the problems that are reflecting through from the terrible war that's going on in the Ukraine. And that is causing immense cost pressures on dairy farms. And what that means is people like myself are cutting back on production. And at the moment, really, that's the last thing we need people to do, because we need to make sure we've got food for the next 12, 18, 24 months.
Well, and, Abby Reader, that we'll get on to food security and the fact that we only produce about half of the food we consume in this country. And, if COVID's taught us anything, it's about the fragility of supply chains. But just, the tractor you're in now, just breaking this down in terms of the input prices that have been rocketing. The tractor you're in today, OK, it's got red diesel, that's cheaper than what I'll pay on the forecourt. That's right that it should be cheaper, given your strategic importance. We need to grow food. But it'll do about, if it's a clever one, it'll do more than 5 miles per gallon, but most of them do around about 5 miles per gallon. And suddenly, if red diesel is doubling in price, how do you cope with a rise like that?
Yeah, well, the last load of fuel I had delivered, which was about a fortnight ago, I didn't even know what the price was going to be until after it had been delivered. We just had to have fuel to make sure we were able to do all the essential duties on the yard that we require tractors for, which is mainly feeding animals. What it does mean at the moment is I am restricting the amount of times that we're using the tractor. So the cows who would normally be in at night still, because it's still quite cold, have been put outside, and they are just going to have to work off the grass. And then normally we'd be adding some extra things to their food just to make sure that they've got a stronger nutrition base, which would encourage a stronger milk yield. But we're just not having that at the minute. We're working on the bare minimum. And making sure that the cows have got enough for themselves, but not enough to push milk yields up to high levels. And you're going to see that across herds all the way across the UK, really.
And I know we'll always get people saying, well, they're not very environmentally friendly, all that methane. That's disputed, isn't it? But, these are cows that go on to grazing pasture, all that carbon that's sequestrated into the grazing. That's fantastic. But to make that grazing work most efficiently, you've got to introduce fertiliser to enrich the soil, put some elements that aren't there naturally. And the price of those fertiliser has gone absolutely through the roof.
Yeah, so about a year ago, I would have been paying about £240, £250 a tonne for fertiliser. At the moment, it's about £950 a tonne, and it doesn't appear to be moving all that much. And again, what that means is people like myself are not buying fertiliser, or certainly not buying as much as we normally would. Now, fertiliser might be painted as the big bad wolf, but actually it's responsible for helping to feed 4 billion people throughout the world. So that's half the population. We rely on it to feed ourselves. We can't just simply go organic. If you think about if you go into a supermarket and you might select some organic produce, you know that it's a little bit more expensive. And that's because it comes with a price. Whether you're buying milk, it means that you have less cows on your farm, you're on a lower stocking rate, or if you're buying veg, then you're going to have to put up with more issues such as weeds, pests, etc., because you can't use certain products to control those issues. And fertiliser is really one of those key things that we rely on as a country and as the world to make sure that we are providing food for this ever-growing nation.
Abby Reader, really appreciate your time. Thanks for talking to us this afternoon. Thanks a lot. Lynn May is my studio guest today, who grew up in a rural area. You see these tractors thundering down rural lanes and all the rest of it. Just to the point about what we grow at home and the environmental argument. During the commercial break, we were talking about this. I was saying one of my kids is a vegetarian, and I say to her, your 2 avocados in coming from Colombia are using up about as much of the carbon footprint as driving a Polo for a year. For heaven's sake.
Well, it's so idealistic, and this is just like one of the things that you've highlighted. And when I did some research, because I used to be a vegan before, it was like a fad. But even if you look at things such as quinoa and chickpeas, and because our requirement, or our desire rather, has gone up in the West, it's actually pushing up the prices in the countries that it comes from. So people think they're doing this, all social responsibility and being greener, but what you're actually doing is taking food from those countries such as South American countries. So you're not really doing anything, you're just doing this sort of selfish way of life.
Displacing your guilt.
Exactly. So I think farmers have had a really hard time of it, and I think we need to be a little less idealistic.
Len, for now, thanks very much indeed. We're going to bring you the daily news bulletin now. Here's Simon.
Hello, it's 5:35. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky says Russia has committed the most terrible war crimes since World War II. Speaking via video link at United Nations Security Council in New York, he warned of what he called further Russian cruelty in other Ukrainian towns and villages. It followed the UN chief Antonio Guterres saying the invasion is one of the greatest challenges ever to international world order. President Zelensky added that Moscow wanted to turn Ukraine into silent slaves.
Russian troops are deliberately destroying Ukrainian cities to ashes with artillery and airstrike. They are deliberately blocking city, creating mass starvation. They deliberately shoot columns of civilians on the road trying to escape from the territory of hostilities. They even deliberately blow up shelters where civilians hide from airstrikes.
Meanwhile, the mayor of the Ukrainian town Bucha has asked residents to wait before returning to their homes as the area is still unsafe. Anatoly Fedoryuk warned of mines in the area as discarded weaponry is being cleared from the streets. He also accused Russian troops of deliberately killing civilians during their month-long occupation of the town in the Kiev region. The Kremlin denies the allegations. Here in the UK, the government has commissioned a review of the latest scientific evidence on fracking. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has written to the British Geological Survey asking for a report on the latest evidence around the extraction of shale gas. Since 2019, there has been suspension on the process as it is not possible to accurately predict tremors associated with fracking. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Brazier will be back in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Do try and read some of your emails that you sent to us in great numbers today, actually. Peter has responded to that debate conversation we had with Dorothy Byrne, former head of news at Channel 4, and Kelvin Mackenzie, who took a contrary view, former editor of The Sun. She talked about the creative industries and the necessity of providing support for them. Peter says, why do the media lovies always talk about the creative industries, meaning the arts? Do they not realise that manufacturing industries like automotive, electronics, and indeed thousands of others are so creative that they support themselves without recourse to public, and then with great conviction, he puts in brackets, our funding, taxpayers' money. That's Lynn May. You can hear making those noises off in agreement. We'll talk to her about the other stories shortly. Now, a lot's been written about how Britain is more welcoming of European refugees compared to asylum seekers from other parts of the world. But the criticism falls a bit flat when you consider the numbers of Hong Kong residents escaping the former British colony to make a new life here in the UK. In the first 2 months of this year, for instance, 78,000 Hong Kongers left. It's not just the introduction of new laws drafted by the island's increasingly assertive communist rulers in Beijing. What's become known as the Hong Kong brain drain is also a result, some say, of stifling COVID regulations. Well, joining me now is Chung-Ching Kwong, who campaigns for civil rights in Hong Kong. Welcome to you and thanks for your time. This is an economy which relies on, it's part of the knowledge economy. I was just talking about the creative industries. This is a part of the world where money is created by people who are highly educated, and you can ill afford to lose tens of thousands of them.
No, Hong Kong actually cannot afford to lose the younger generation, especially when they are like well educated, as you said, and they are basically the capital and the assets of the city. But the thing is, a lot of them don't see a future there, even though there are still like political campaigns happening on the ground. It is natural for a lot of the people who actually want kids to want to leave the country and give their children a better life. And UK having offered the BNO scheme as a half-baked LIFO program, then it's very attractive to a lot of Hong Kongers, and that's why they are coming to the UK and to seek a new life in general.
And people get that. So people, you know, that if you're in Hong Kong, you've got talents, you've got ambitions to have a family, you're thinking about a stable future, a free future for them. When people make the decision to go to UK or the US or Australia or wherever it is, how do they work through that problem? Is it about whether there's an existing family network, whether it's just, you know, ease of visas? What's the process?
I think it depends on different people. For example, for activists like myself or my peers, we don't actually have a choice to think about, we don't have the luxury to think about where can we go. Basically, we only go to the first place that say yes to us. For example, the UK has been an easier place because our youngsters around our age have the BNO passport, so it makes sense. And the visa application fee is relatively cheaper when it compares to other countries. But some people just don't have a BNO passport and they struggle a lot. So they might seek asylum in European Union, they might seek asylum in the US or in somewhere else. So for some more privileged people, then they might have a choice to decide where they want to go because they can go outside of Hong Kong through like normal immigration routes. But that's not a luxury that everybody enjoys. So it really depends on a case-by-case basis.
At what point, Chung-Ching Kwong, if at all, does Beijing take notice and think, OK, this is the golden goose, this is Hong Kong, money talks, and actually this is now a brain drain that is so serious, we need to modify our behaviour. I think even as I ask the question, I know the answer to the question, which is they ultimately won't care.
You're actually right, sadly. Like even as a young Hong Konger, I don't feel like Beijing government or the Hong Kong government actually care about what youngsters like us actually want for the city. They do need Hong Kong as the go goose, as you said. We are its foreign fund channel. We are where it does its money laundering and obtain foreign funds and so on. So we have a strategic importance. But in Beijing's and the Hong Kong government's eyes, Hong Kongers are not needed as long as they can maintain a facade of rule of law and Hong Kong being a financial hub. Then they basically don't need Hong Kongers to run Hong Kong in a way as we should. They only need the facade of things are still going normal. And recently, 2 British judges have left the Hong Kong courts, which is actually a huge sign that something is wrong. The rule of law is no longer something that exists in the city. And I think it will only get worse from here, but ultimately they won't care. And when they started to care, it will be a bit too late for Hong Kong.
Chung-Ching Kwong, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed for joining us today. Thanks a lot. Lin May is alongside me today. I want to make a point that I hope people don't misconstrue, but I find it really interesting where people who have money, who are fleeing a country, go to. They were talking about Hong Kongers. We were talking during a commercial break about Muscovites working for Western companies. They've got money, they've got an education, they've got credentials. Where are they going? They're going to places like Dubai, Istanbul. It's a different set of calculations to the other people we were talking about earlier, who are economic migrants from Eritrea, for instance, who just want to come to the UK because they've heard it's paved with gold. People who are well informed are making different decisions often.
Yeah, and there will be a lot of job roles for them here, certainly. But it's really sad because I think for a country to improve economically, it has to retain its educated population. And brain drain is a huge issue. I think Guyana has the biggest issue with brain drain, with 70% of their educated people leaving and going to America. And if countries, like what she said, don't start caring about their educated, then those countries will never improve.
Yeah. Emails, as before, very welcome. Let me just try and get a couple away, because I know we've been asking for them. We have a duty to read them out, therefore. We've been talking about soap operas. Dot Cotton, the actress who played Dot Cotton, died in the last couple of days. Death was announced. And she was, lastly, pretty critical of the way soap operas have become, including EastEnders, woke, in essence. We had this from Molly regarding EastEnders. I'm with you. I gave up last year, having watched it from the start. Too woke and biased, said Molly. Kerr, we've forgotten about radio, haven't we? The Archers, Ambridge should be renamed Wokebridge, says Kerr. They won't do it, by the way. Conservative Hungarian leader Viktor Orban led his party to a fourth consecutive landslide victory on Sunday. Mr. Orban's party, Fidesz, defeated a six-party opposition coalition and won 53.1% of the vote, with 98% of votes counted. Translates to 135 seats in the Hungarian parliament, which is a two-thirds majority. The Prime Minister said, "We won a victory so big that you can see it from the moon, and you can certainly see it from Brussels." Joining me now from Budapest to discuss this, John O'Sullivan was once a senior advisor to Margaret Thatcher when she was in Downing Street. He's now president of the Danube Institute. It's a think tank that's based in Hungary. John O'Sullivan, thanks so much for your time. What are people here to make of what's happened where you are?
It's not really a big surprise, but it is a surprise. I think generally most observers expected him to win, Orban to win, Fidesz to win. Why? Well, fundamentally, in the last sort of 12 years he's been in power, the economy has generally improved. Secondly, the government has been quite a good government in an old-fashioned sense, that there isn't a constant atmosphere of crisis and anxiety. Problems arise, they're dealt with, sometimes successfully, sometimes less so, but nonetheless they're dealt with. The country moves on. On the policies that were controversial in the past, namely over migration, and secondly over the policy of spending a great deal of public money and putting effort into encouraging Hungarians to have children, to establish families. Those policies, generally, they're very hard policies to pull off successfully, but you have to say that they're spending about 6% of GDP on family encouragement, really, and that seems to be going reasonably well. Early days yet. So all in all, it wasn't a surprise, but the war, I think, made it more of a surprise, because it could have, the influence of the war on the election, some people thought that it would Orban's re-election, but the fact was he seems to have caught the public mood. The public mood here is very different from that, say, in Poland, where there's a passionate support for Ukraine. Here, there is much more a feeling of anxiety. We don't want to get involved in the war. That's the truth of the matter. He caught that mood, he intensified it, and that gave him, I think, the supermajority that he's got.
That's interesting, because I mean, Hungary's taken in 500,000 refugees, so it's not as if they're uninvolved. He's also condemned the invasion. I mean, there are those people in the West who feel he's still been much too close to the Putin regime, and yet we still end up with a headline like this in The Guardian. Orban's victory in Hungary adds to the darkness engulfing Europe. For some people, Orban will continue being a sort of panto villain.
You're quite right about that. Now, what is how do we balance this? The answer is, of course, that yes, the Hungarian government has formally condemned the Russian invasion. It's also gone along with all of the NATO and EU sanctions, really, for the last 3 or 4 years. It has not, however, expressed as passionately as the Poles have done, and even the Czechs and the Slovaks, the anger towards Putin. And Orban and his government would say they're acting prudently. They want to stay out. They don't want to give false impressions of being drawn into the war. But nonetheless, that's created a difficulty for the Hungarians with the other nations of Central Europe, because they have, in a sense, wanted a more passionate denunciation of Putin and the Russians. And I think now we're bound to see a slight shift in the future, because the Visegrad Four, the Central European countries, they are very important to Hungarians and in foreign policy. The Hungarians regard the Visegrad as the basis for a strong position in the rest of Europe. And that's not just a political, defense, or economic cooperation. They want to get people to see Central Europe as, so to speak, a civilizational unit. And I think for that reason, they're going to move more to taken. And also, of course, as you say, they've taken in an enormous number of refugees, second to the Poles. And that, I think, is an expression of their concern, which they'll want to play up.
Very keen to talk on another occasion, because we're out of time now, John O'Sullivan, about the pro-natalist policies you describe. It's worth noting to our viewers, if you are, I think, a mother of 4 in Hungary, you pay no income tax. No other state in the Western world has gone further to encourage its people to have kids, an increasingly unfashionable idea in many parts of the West. John O'Sullivan, really appreciate your time. We'll talk to you again soon, I hope. But for now, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is alongside me here in the studio. Viktor Orban since 2015 and the migrant crisis. I was in Hungary at the time, and I thought when he had his riot police stopping people walking into his country, he had a right to do that. Most of my contemporaries in journalism felt he didn't.
He's fallen under a lot of criticism with regards to Ukraine as well. Shares a border with Ukraine, and I completely understand why he would not want to get involved. So, as you said, he's taken in a lot of refugees, but unlike Poland, refuses to get involved, refuses to send any military support, and I agree.
Pithy, another pithy one. Right there. Now, we're going to move on to this one. Before his death in 2018, the world's most celebrated physicist, Stephen Hawking, said a number of times that he believed aliens existed somewhere in the universe, and that while he felt trying to find and learn about them was a worthwhile pursuit, attempting to contact them was daft. Well, scientists have chosen to ignore this advice and have decided to broadcast our precise location throughout the galaxy. Joining me to discuss this, the space expert, Andy Lound. Andy Lound, welcome to you. I didn't write that introduction. Throughout the galaxy, I'm not sure that's... Maybe it is right. Is that, or is it sort of just beaming off in one direction?
It just beamed off in a general direction, really. We've done it before. We did it in 1974 with the Arecibo dish. More of an exercise to prove we could do it, really. And it was essentially beaming a signal towards to a cluster, a star cluster, which is... It's going to take thousands of years to get there. It was a bit of an impractical exercise, but it was a demonstration to show what we were. And it was a sort of a binary code showing us the shape of a human, which was a stick man, some basic mathematical symbols, and the Arecibo dish. This proposed project is to do something a little bit more detailed than that, sending a lot more information out, DNA code. The top line would be prime numbers. And therefore, you wouldn't have a line of prime numbers in a transmission without it being done by some intelligence. So that's a sort of a key to say, hang on, this is an artificial signal, followed by the position of our solar system based on interstellar positions, usually pulsars scattered around our galaxy. And they could actually point, if you like, it's like radio beacons pointing towards where we would be. And that would send the signal out to tell people out there where we are. Take 4.2 years to reach the nearest star system, which is Proxima Alpha Centauri system, but it depends where you decide to beam it. The suggestion is that 2 dishes, the largest one in the world, which is in China, could be used, and also an array in the United States to transmit signals, perhaps at a different angle. And you're right, Stephen Hawking said we should be careful what we transmit out, because extraterrestrials might actually be, we call it the independence day theory, where they come to actually, if you like, harvest our planet for everything that's here. But we have to be realistic here. We're already transmitting into space. What we're talking about now, in 4.2 years' time, will reach the vicinity of Alpha Centauri. And if they've got any equipment, they could tune in and pick it up.
Andy, and just to flip that on its head, are you one of those people who is surprised that if all this stuff, electromagnetic stuff or radio waves, is leaching out into the universe, are you surprised we haven't picked it up in the background noise of the universe? Does that surprise you, that we're not hearing other people's activity?
It does to a certain degree. It does, yes, because when I worked with the Planetary Society, one of our big projects was actually listening for signals from space, and we're doing looking for laser light communication systems from space now. The problem is with all this is we could be missing an extraterrestrial species by millions of years, because we've only been here for a very short space of time. In our communicative phase, we've just over 100 years. In high-powered phase, the first high-powered signal we ever transmitted out in space is 1936, which ironically enough is the opening of the Berlin Olympics, strangely enough. So only from 1936 could you say that we've sent out a signal that could really be realistically picked up by anybody. That's very narrow in the age of the universe. So we could be just missing these signals which have come from space. Species may have moved on from the communicative phase that we would use, and technology they've had has moved on. Maybe we're being completely bombarded by signals, but at such a rate we don't have the technology to pick them up yet. And that's interesting. But I do feel, as opposed to being frightened of extraterrestrials picking up our signal, I think they'd be perhaps concerned at picking us up, I think would be the more concern at the moment. And if they look at us, let's be realistic. If they look at us, an advanced species looks at us, what the heck are they going to say? What a primitive bunch of people they are.
Andy, we enjoyed the science, and now you're introducing philosophy. You have to leave that to the philosophers, but we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Lynn May is alongside me. How long have we got left? 20 seconds. What was your favourite part of today's show?
Discussing with the gentleman here.
Yeah, he's great, isn't he?
Yeah,
he's absolutely great. And are you in favour of sending off our exact location to aliens who may want to come and...
So who's funding this? Is it independent?
Oh, now there's a question. I'm here to ask the questions, Lynn. That's the way it works. I know...
As long as it's not our taxpayers' money, because who are we sending it to?
We'll see you in a fortnight, we hope. Thanks very much indeed. Do stay with us. Jubes & Co. is next.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A windy day to come on Wednesday, a different feel for many as well, a colder feeling day. There'll be some sunshine, but there will be a whole raft of showers. Mild air has been sitting across most of the country, but just poking out across the far north, colder air here, and where we've had this weather front sitting, that has been producing some heavy snowfall, which continues well into the evening. Aberdeenshire, Moray, Caithness, Sutherland seeing several more centimetres in places. That turns to rain and pushes north, ends up being a very wet and windy night across Orkney. Elsewhere, we'll see showers, bands of showers zipping southwards. It will be a relatively mild night for most, but a colder feel on Wednesday, which will, broadly speaking, be a day of sunshine and showers. There will be some heavy showers, but they will tend to zip through because of the strength of the breeze. It stays very wet and windy across Orkney, and the showers across Scotland may, over the hills, turn back to snow later on. But for most, it'll be rain showers with sunny spells in between. Temperatures still up to double figures, maybe up into the mid-teens across the southeast, but feeling colder than today as that wind strengthens. Could get very windy on Wednesday night across Northern Ireland, western parts of Scotland. A potential for more wet weather to come into parts of the south as well. Some uncertainty about the northward extent of that rain. Certainly further north, the showers will keep going, and they'll start to turn more to sleet and snow once more, even to low levels across parts of Scotland. Maybe a wet start then for southeastern areas on Thursday, but that should scoot away, and then we'll have some sunny spells. But there will be more showers coming in across northern Britain. A wintry flavour, snow on hills, sleet, hail at low levels. Some good spells of sunshine, however. But look at the temperatures. Single figures for the vast majority on Thursday. Add on that wind, and it will feel bitter.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.